This video is on the eye. I will do a separate one on the ear. So get out your eye and ear parts to know lab form. First, we'll go over the surface anatomy. Here's a picture of an eye, a real person. So let's go down your list. You all know where the eyelid is. The lacrimal gland, which makes your tears, would be in the upper lateral part. Now this is her nose. So the lacrimal gland would be right here. It's going to show up on some of the models. It makes our tears. They would then flow down into the eye, cross to the medial side, and here, where you see that little expansion, a knob there kind of, that's going to lead to the nasolacrimal duct, which is going to take the lacrimal tears down into the nose. The other things we see here, the white of the eye is called the sclera, there and there. The colored part of the eye, which is a muscle, is the iris, and then the hole that lets light into your eye that appears black is the pupil. Now this sclera, the white of the eye, actually becomes clear as it goes across the iris and the pupil, and that's called the cornea, but it's clear, again, so that light can get through. And then on top of the cornea, you've heard of the conjunctiva maybe. It's a thin mucous membrane covering the whole outer part of the visible eye. Pupil, iris, sclera. Cornea, covering, clear covering of the iris and pupil. On top of all of this is the conjunctiva. Let's look at this guy's eye. Okay, so we can see the black pupil, colored iris, white sclera. Covering this would be a cornea. Covering the whole thing would be the conjunctiva. We can see the nice lacrimal gland here, the lateral part. And this would be the nasolacrimal duct would be here, and this will lead on down into the nose because your tears drain into your nose. Most of this eye is actually held into the orbit by fat. So they removed all the fat, but that's what holds it in place. All right, next we'll go over the eye muscles. Now first, I'm going to show you on a couple pictures. We have 4 rectus muscles. Now this looks like a lateral view, and that's a superior view. So I'll show you the superior view first, and we'll go to the model. There's 4 rectus muscles, and rectus means straight. This is looking straight down on the eye from the superior. So we have a superior rectus going straight along the superior part of the eye. We have an inferior rectus under that. You can barely see it right here, leading to the inferior of the eye. We have a lateral rectus here, lateral part, and then the medial part right in here, the medial rectus, straight to the medial of the eye. Now you're saying, how do I know that's the medial? Well, it is labeled, but notice that the optic nerve is going to go medially towards the brain there. But usually they'll show the nose on these pictures, and you'll know that that's the medial. We have 2 oblique muscles, which means they run at an angle. So this is the superior oblique because it comes along here and then runs at an angle to come to the superior or top of the eye. So the whole muscle, superior oblique there. It is along the medial, but it curves through this little ligament here to meet the superior of the eye. This one, again, medial rectus. This is superior oblique coming there. And then we have an inferior oblique. You can see part of it here. also coming at an angle from the inferior. So, there. Now let's look at a lateral view, looking from the side. Lateral rectus, superior rectus, inferior rectus. There is your inferior oblique. Here's your superior oblique. There. All right, let's look on a model. Okay, we'll go back and forth here. We're in the lab again. All right, so here is the eye that we have. And let's go over some of the external features too while we're here. This is the medial. Will be your nose coming off. So here, pupil, iris, sclera. Now they do have, it's broken here, but they do have a plastic piece simulating the cornea there. Here's the lacrimal gland, upper lateral part. Here would be the nasolacrimal duct, right there. This model, you can see the cornea a lot better. The whole plastic piece isn't broken. All right, now for the muscles, let's see. Let's look from the lateral view first. All right, from the lateral view, lateral rectus, superior rectus. See if we can find the medial rectus. Right here, it's got to go straight. Medial, no curve to it. And here we look at the bottom, we can see the inferior rectus. They're all coming straight. Now, kind of at the superior here, we can see the superior oblique. It runs along the medial, but then it curves through this little ligament and comes to the superior at an oblique angle. The inferior oblique, we can see right here. That's definitely coming at from an inferior direction and obliquely at an angle. This one, they kind of cut the muscles off, but you would know this is the lateral rectus because your lacrimal gland is on the lateral. You would know this is the superior rectus because it's coming straight. And then you would know this is the medial rectus because it's coming straight. The other way you can tell, remember I said that optic nerve is going to angle towards the medial as it goes to the brain. So that would make this the medial rectus. This little piece would be part of the superior oblique, the ending of the superior oblique. And for the inferior oblique, it doesn't look like that's the inferior rectus there. So I don't really see an inferior oblique on this one. But on this one, you can definitely tell it. Right there. Okay, now back to our list. We're now going to go over the layers of the eye. Before I show you that, I'm going to show you on a picture, but let's just go over these layers on this sheet real quick. 3 main layers. An outer fibrous tunic. Now we're calling the layers tunics. Fibrous outer tunic. Then under that, we're going to have a vascular tunic, which you remember vascular means blood vessels. That's going to include blood vessels, some pigments, and muscles. Muscles are usually in red too, because they have a good blood supply. And then deepest layer is your sensory tunic that has the sensory organs, the rods and cones, and the nerves. And then we have some subparts there. But let's look at this picture, and you have a nice one in your book, but this is the only one I have right now. And let's just look at these 3 main layers. From the outside, we're going to have the fibrous tunic, kind of in light blue, goes all the way around the eye. Second layer, they do have in pink. That's the vascular layer. And then the sensory layer is in yellow. Sensory receptors, rods and cones, and nerves leads to the optic nerve. Now let's look at some of the subparts. The fibrous tunic has 2 main subparts. sclera, which you already saw, and the cornea. Now, what we want to point out here is the sclera does go completely around the eye, and then you see part of it up here. It's many fibers. And then it has to become clear as it goes and protrudes out. It has to become clear, that's the cornea, as it covers the iris and the pupil. Two parts. The vascular tunic, we have the part in the back, posterior, is the choroid layer, and that's the bulk of it. Many blood vessels keeping these parts alive. And then we turn into a couple muscles here. This part is the ciliary body or ciliary muscle that has ligaments that hold the lens in place. Remember, the lens bends the light rays so they hit your retina at the right spot. Cornea is going to help with the bending, which is called refraction as well. So we have the choroid layer, ciliary muscle, and suspensory ligaments and the lens. The other muscle here is the colored muscle, the iris. Now they kind of cut it off here, but you can see the brown. The iris is a muscle. And the iris surrounds the pupil opening here. So the iris can extend or draw back, constrict and dilate to change the size of your pupil. Now let's see how it does that. Iris, circular muscle, remember it's pigmented. So you see, there's two sets of muscles in the iris, but if we want to constrict the pupil, these circular muscles would contract and make that hole smaller in bright light. If we want to dilate the pupil in dim light, then these radial muscles, look kind of like a wheel, would contract and open this pupil up. That's the iris. All right, so choroid, ciliary muscles, suspensory ligaments, lens, iris, and pupil is the opening. The sensory tunic in yellow, now that's the one that only starts about a third back in the eye, because remember, these are photoreceptors. They receive light and turn them into nerve impulses, rods and cones all along there. And then we have the optic nerve here. Sensory tunic, sensory layer, and the optic nerve. Okay, now what we're going to have here in the sensory layer are two spots. This spot, right where the optic nerve comes out, there's no rods and cones, there's nothing there, just blood vessels and the nerve. So that is our blind spot, because when light hits that spot, we don't see anything. And that does show up on the inside of the eye. And then this little area, a little dip here, is called the Macula Latia. It is called the macula here. Macula Latia is where most of our cones, which are for color vision, are located. And when we see something clearly, we angle our head so that the light will hit the macula latia and we can see things clear and in color. Otherwise, the light's going to hit over here, which is mostly our rods. We're going to see more things in black and white, not quite as clear. Now, the center of the macula latia is the fovea centralis, and that has even more cones. All right. Now, when the doctor looks in your eye, they can see some of these things. And let's see, here's a picture of that. When they shine that light in your eye and they're looking at the back of your retina here, you can see all these blood vessels. They can see the blind spot, because remember, the blood vessels are entering the retinal area there, along with the optic nerve. That's the blind spot. And then we can also see a spot here, the macula latia, and they can see if that's normal or not. Okay. Now let's go to the model. Oh, I will point out these little cavities while we're here. There's two cavities filled with fluid. The anterior cavity, which is filled with an aqueous fluid called aqueous humor. That means a watery fluid. That's anterior to the lens. And then the posterior cavity is filled with a jelly-like fluid called the vitreous humor. And that's in the posterior cavity, posterior to the lens. So since this is the lens, the anterior cavity with aqueous humor is there. And back here is the vitreous jelly-like humor in the posterior cavity. So this posterior cavity is mainly to keep the humor, vitreous humor there is to keep the shape of the eyeball, keep the retina pushed against the back. Aqueous humor distributes some nutrients there and keeps proper pressure in the eye. Let's go to the model. All right, we'll try to take this one apart here. First, let's look at the fibrous tunic. Again, the sclera goes all the way around the eye and the muscles attached to that. We got so many muscles. You're wondering why we have so many muscles. 6 eye muscles. Well, you can do many things with your eyes. Left, right, up and down. You can roll them around. That's why we need so many muscles there. The second part of the fibrous tunic, besides the sclera, is this clear covering we already went over, the cornea. Fibrous tunic, sclera, cornea. Now we have to take this apart. Hopefully it's not going to fall apart. And I can get it off. Okay. I'm just going to take this out and I'll put this back here shortly. Okay. Now our lens fell out here, so our lens would be right here. Might have to hold that in place. Here, let me see if I can get it in this one to stay. No? Okay. So here, let's look down on this. We can see the fibrous tunic sclera going all the way around. So the red is the vascular tunic. The bulk of it, all the way around here, is called the choroid. Now when it gets up here and expands, that's going to be the ciliary body or ciliary muscle. And that's going to have ligaments, which they don't show here, connecting and holding this lens in place. Like that. But the lens is right behind the pupil here. So if light comes in, it's going to come in through the cornea. The cornea is going to bend a little bit. It's going to come through the pupil opening. It's going to come through the lens, which is going to bend the light even more to try to get it to hit in the proper spot on the back of the eye, the retina. All right, so choroid, ciliary body, and then we had the ligaments holding the lens in place. Now it looks like to me they were probably trying to simulate the ligaments with these white lines here. Okay? And then the second muscle there is the iris. Okay? So that would be this brown part here, looking down there, and that's around the pupil. Remember? Okay. So if we kind of look at it like this, choroid, ciliary body, our lens would be right in here again, held in by those white ligaments, and then our iris muscle would be circular around the pupil. That's the vascular. Now, the sensory layer here is shown in, it looks like gray. Okay, gray. So all of this is the sensory layer. Remember, it starts about right here. Okay, starts about right here. And this would all be the iris muscle. They're just showing in black here because it's the posterior part. Sensory tunic, rods and cones from here back. Now this would be your blind spot here, where the nerve comes out. They don't really show the Macula Latia here, but it would be somewhere in here. That would be a lot of these models, they show it as a colored spot as opposed to a white or opening here for the optic nerve, which is a blind spot. I think some of the models I have in the lab study slides show the Macula Latia about right there on a purple spot. Now let's put this back, and this is simulating on the sensory tunic, the rods and cones. Okay, now rods and cones would be back here. You probably can't tell the difference. Maybe you can. Rods are straight, cones are sort of like, almost like triangles, but that's simulating the rods and cones and the neurons, and this is simulating them coming together and becoming the optic nerve there. This also shows you the chambers of the eye. Let's try to get this lens back in, okay? It's hard to do, especially with one hand, but I think I can do it. Okay, there you go. This is simulating the posterior chamber and the vitreous humor. You can see the lens now. So the anterior chamber would be anterior to the lens, between the lens and the iris, and continuing up to the cornea. Anything anterior to the lens, anterior chamber, aqueous humor, anything posterior to the lens, posterior chamber with vitreous humor. This one is the same thing. I don't know if it's going to come out anymore. This is the one that had the complete muscles. I probably can't detach too much here. I can try to pull these muscles off. And, okay, so here's the same thing. You can kind of see the connections here better. Sclera in white with the cornea, plastic, fibrous tunic. Vascular tunic, choroid, kind of brownish, comes up here, becomes the ciliary muscle, ciliary body with the white suspensory ligaments holding the lens in place. And then it becomes the iris muscle around the pupil. Here again, we can see the chambers, anterior to lens, aqueous humor in the anterior chamber. Posterior lens is big plastic piece simulating the posterior chamber with the vitreous humor. I can't see the sensory tunic until I take this out. Along with the, oh, there goes my lens. It stayed in one piece, so. Here's the optic nerve coming out the back. That's part of the sensory tunic. We take this whole thing out. And now we can see the gray sensory tunic. We would have a blind spot, white spot here. Macula Latia would be a purple spot there. Remember on this we had the rods and cones here. Okay, now we look back at our sheet. Come over here, and I think we got a couple of other things to look at. On the microscopic view, here, the only thing really to tell there, and I have a picture in the lab study slides, is the retina stains purple because those rods and cones are cells with nucleuses. So the light would be coming in here towards the back of the eye, and it would hit the retina first. And those purple are the rods and cones. Then, posterior to that is the choroid layer, the vascular tunic. Stains a different color, blood vessels. And then posterior to that, we have the fibrous tunic, which is the sclera. And that's staining pink because that's connective tissue. Sclera, fibrous tunic, choroid vascular tunic, purple sensory tunic with rods and cones. All right, now the cowl eye, we have some good pictures in there. That's the, and I have some good pictures here too. And we have a mounted specimen of a cowl eye as well. So here we can see the fibrous tunic. That's all sclera. And then even though it's kind of cloudy, that is the cornea. Then when we cut the eye, we can see some of the vascular tunic here. Now the vascular tunic would be this black area here, would be the choroid. And then if we got close, we'd see the ciliary muscle. Looks like a wheel kind of. And then we'd see the iris right there and there around the pupil. And there's the pupil. Blind spot, if we can see where the nerve comes out, right there, where it would come out, that would be your optic disc, which is the blind spot. So the optic disc is the disc where the optic nerve comes out, and since you can't see anything there, they call it the optic disc. If we were able to cut this open, we would see in this posterior chamber would be this jelly-like fluid. But in the anterior chamber near the lens they took out, the pupil, we'd have more of a watery fluid. This light gray would be the retina. All right, here's the real one. I know you might not get a full appreciation of it here. The lab study slides will help. In the lab, we do this sometimes. But looking at the exterior here, we can see the sclera and the cornea. Now they cut half of the cornea off, so you could see the pupil. Even though it's not black here, that's the opening. This here would be the iris. Even though it's not colored, or it looks dark, it's the iris around the pupil. Now let's look at it from the side. We can see the lens in place there. They didn't show it in those pictures. It's really hard, right there. The choroid is the black. And if you move forward there, you're not going to be able to see the iris from this angle. You can barely see the pupil, the white opening, and the iris would be around it. You can see a lot of the choroid. Go by the pictures in lab. We're concentrating on the human eye, but the cow eye is pretty, shows a lot of it too. Retina is the light gray there, lining everything. Blind spot or optic disc would be where the optic nerve comes out. We cannot see the Macula Latia on this eye. All right, the last thing looks like some eye test. Okay, now we have the Snellen Eye Test, which is your regular test to test for visual acuity. Acuity means clearness, and we've all done this eye test before. The Snellen Eye Chart. So if I'm looking at this eye chart now, you can see it up there. All right, let's go up to it. See where it says Visual Acuity Chart, Snellen Scale. Now beside these letters, you'll see these numbers. 20, 200, 20, 100, 2070, etc. Okay? Now what this means is you're supposed to stand 20 feet away from this chart. So I'm going to go back 20 feet. Fortunately, each tile in here is a foot. So I go back about 20 feet. And now I can see my eye chart. Now from here, I'm trying to see what line I can read. Now I have my glasses on, so I can see the last row. NPXTZF. And I can see the one above it, PHUNT. That's great, because what that means is at 20 feet, I can see the bottom line. That means I'm 20/15. I want to be 20/20. Now I'm going to go back and take my glasses off. And I wish you could see how it looks with my glasses off. Because if I take my glasses off at 20 feet, I can only see the third line, DFN. So if I go up to that now, it says I'm 20/70. That means at 20 feet, I can see what people without glasses can see at 70 feet. Okay? Now, if I can only see the big E at 20 feet, I'd be 2200, because what the 200 means is people that don't need glasses with normal vision or good vision could see the big E at 200 feet. That's what that means. Another eye test is called the Astigmatism Chart, and they use this wheel here. Now this one you only go 10 feet back, and you close one eye and look at that, and if the spokes of the wheel, some of them are blurrier than the others and some are sharper, that means you have an astigmatism, which is kind of an irregular curvature of the eyeball, particularly with your peripheral vision. So if I take my glasses off and close one eye, the middle spoke and the spoke above it going in an angle, it looks like number 10 and 4 are sharper than the rest of it. If I close my other eye, then 3, 9, 2, and 8 are darker than the rest of it. So I have an astigmatism. Now, that was 1 and 3. Now we also have a blind spot test. And this is just something fun to do. Remember we said that optic disc is your blind spot. So what you do is you draw an X and a dot on a piece of paper, where you can get something like this. And what you do is you hold it out. It says about 20 inches, just extend your arm out. Now close your right eye. Actually, close your left eye and concentrate, close your left eye and aim your right eye at the X. Now you bring this in, keep looking at the X with your right eye, your left eye's closed, and as you bring it in, when that dot disappears, that's your blind spot. So it disappeared now. And I know you can see it, but I can't see it. So that would be where my blind spot is. And it comes into view again when I go out. That's just pointing out that there is a spot on your eye where the optic nerve comes out, called the optic disc. That's your blind spot. And then we have the color blindness test. I don't think I put that on there. I put an accommodation test there. I don't think we have the capability of doing that here, but you could read about it in the lab study slides. But this color vision will handle that Pretty cool. I'm red-green colorblind, so a lot of these things I can't see. But if you look at something like this, you're supposed to be able to see a 12, and I can do that. But when we get up to some of these other ones, number 5 here, you're supposed to be able to see a number 35 here, and I don't see much. Supposed to see a 35. Do you see it? And if I go further up, let's say go up to number 10 now. Here, what are we supposed to see in number 10? We're supposed to see a 2. I just see a bunch of dots. So I'm kind of red-green colorblind. That means I'm missing some of my red and green cones. But I can see the colors, but I just can't see them well enough. I can tell a red light and green light, so don't worry. And let's do one more. We'll do number 15. And that should be a 7 there. I see some green, but not in the shape of a 7. That's the colorblind test. And I think I told you in the lecture that I'm brown-gray colorblind. And I found that out recently when my daughter said I have gray hair, and I said, no, it's brown. And I realized I'm brown-gray colorblind. All right, we're going to do the ear separately. You can't wink.